Welcome back to another episode of the Sunday Stache. Here with episode number 15. This week's been pretty crazy, to be honest, and that's really, I guess, taking it lightly. Mainly, just one day that it was all kind of crazy, and that was the day that people broke into the Capitol. But I'll actually get into that here in a minute. Today's topics are going to be I want to talk about Elon Musk becoming the richest man in the world. I want to talk about Edinson Cavani getting a 3-match ban for an Instagram post. The NCAA, what they plan on doing with the March Madness tournament. This closing prayer that was given by the guy in Congress. And then my last topic will be about people breaking into the Capitol. So let's get into it. So Elon Musk, this week, he became the richest man in the world. And it was actually a bit of a crazy week when it comes to the stock market and everything in general. I say crazy not because of it went up and down a lot. I mainly say crazy because of the fact that it was just almost up. You know, everything was just continued to rise and rise and rise and rise. I've already made, in the stock market, I've made more money this year in my portfolio. I haven't sold anything, but I've made more money this year in my portfolio than I make an actual salary. So pretty crazy week in the stock market, especially for me, and also for Mr. Musk here. So Elon Musk, finally, he surpassed Jeff Bezos as the richest man in the world. And how he did that was honestly mainly because of just Tesla stock. According to Investopedia, Elon Musk owns 193.3 million shares of Tesla. I want to say I had done the math and he had like 170. I thought he had 170 million, but according to Investopedia, he's got 193 million shares of Tesla, which has been skyrocketing over the last year, which is the reason why he went from like 20th on the list all the way up to number 2 as of the week, like not this past week, but the week before. And then this past week, Tesla has been soaring. It went up from $700 a share or something like that, all the way to, I think it closed at $880 on Friday. So it's actually pretty wild. And that's the big reason why he has pushed his way to the top of the list, sitting by himself. In addition to the shares that he owns of Tesla. So if you do the math, 193 million times $880 per share, it doesn't actually come out to be over $200 billion. You have to actually include I think it comes out to about 170 billion. You have to include everything else that he owns. So in addition to Tesla, he also owns 54% of SpaceX, which is valued at $46 billion. So that's roughly 22 billion that he owns in value in SpaceX. He also owns, I think he's the founder / CEO of the Boring Company, but that's also part of SpaceX. And then Solar City, which is part of Tesla. So those two other companies right there are technically part of other companies that he already owns. In addition to his stuff with Tesla and his stuff with SpaceX, he owns a lot of property. Well, not a lot of property, but he owns a lot of property in California, or some property in California, which from what I understand, he's started to sell a lot of that stuff, and he doesn't want to actually own anything. And I want to say that I had heard in a video somebody made, or something that I was listening to, maybe it was somebody else's podcast, might have been Joe Rogan actually, that he's paying $300,000 a month for wherever it is that he plans on living. So it's pretty crazy. So anyway, he owns some property / owns some property in California. I'm not really sure what he's doing. So that totals his net worth out to be like $200 billion. So he's the first person to ever pass $200 billion. Bezos, if he hadn't gotten divorced from his ex-wife, Bezos actually would have surpassed the $200 billion mark probably sometime last year, because of the number of shares that he owns in Amazon. Or owned in Amazon. He owns 50 some million shares, and prior to the divorce, he owned 76 million shares. So in the divorce, his wife took a decent amount of those shares. So about 20 million shares, which totaled out to be, I think, like $40 billion or something like that. Anyway, moving on. One thing to keep in mind with this wealth that these guys have, a lot of it is it's tied up in stock. So it's not like liquid value. It's not like these guys can actually it's not like Musk has $200 billion worth of money that he can just go out and start spending. It's all value in what Tesla is worth. If in 3 days we find out that there's some fraudulent thing going on with Tesla, the stock price isn't necessarily going to be worth $880. It could go down to being worth $100. Right, and if it's worth $100, he still owns 193 million shares. So he's not. It's not like he's poor, but it's not 200 billion. So it's all tied up in value. It's the same with Bezos. It's the same with, I think, Zuckerberg. All these guys, their value of their net worth is tied up in stock. Now, don't get me wrong. Do these guys have cash sitting around to where they can go and buy a Ferrari like it's nothing? Definitely. But they're not sitting around, they're not sitting around with $200 billion in their bank account and looking at that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And if Tesla drops $1, Musk loses $193 million in his net worth. If it drops $10, he loses almost $2 billion in his net worth. And on the flip side, he can also make that, in which he has. He has made all of that, right? If it goes up $100, then he's making, $20 billion or something like that. So it's pretty crazy the amount of money that he can gain and lose all at the same time. And like I said before, most of the money is tied up in stock. If he sells it, then it's going to decrease the value. If he's just all of a sudden flooded the market with 20 million shares of Tesla, it's going to change the value, especially since the CEO is selling his stock. So that's something to keep in mind. He can't just liquidate all of that and have access to $200 billion. In addition to that, he's also not going to end up being, unless I'm wrong, I could be wrong, he won't pay taxes on all that unless he sells it. So, don't go looking for a big, huge tax bill from Elon Musk this year. He's not going to be pumping a few $1 billion into the government from from taxes. It's unlikely that he's going to sell anything. It's unlikely he's going to end up owning any of those. His compensation, even though he was the highest paid CEO of the year, I think most of his compensation was in stock options or something that he's not going to end up having to pay taxes on. So, with tax season coming up as the year ended, it's something to keep in mind. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I think the rich guys, they'll figure out a way of not paying taxes. Think of it in this way. If you're making $1 million a year and your taxes are total at $400,000, and this I'm just using arbitrary numbers. If you're making $1 million and your taxes are $400,000 a year, would you just pay the government that $400,000, or would you find maybe an accountant or a tax attorney and pay that person $100,000 a year so that they can then reduce your taxable income to save you money? Right? They would reduce your taxable income down with deductions and write-offs and however it is that they do it, to the point where you're now saving money by paying someone else as opposed to paying the government. It sounds kind of backwards, but that's what's happening. You're paying money to save money. So that's how these guys end up doing this. I personally, I don't have some fancy accountant or a tax attorney to help me reduce my taxable income because I don't really make enough money to justify paying someone that, at least not right now. So something to keep in mind. We're still not going to see these guys pay a ton of taxes. It's unlikely that places like Amazon are still going to pay taxes. They're going to pay some, but they're going to end up figuring out a way of getting around paying those taxes, as well as all of these rich guys as well. So anyway, Elon Musk, richest man in the world now. We'll see how high he can fly, because I think there have been some price updates to people wanting to put Tesla up above $1,500 a share, which would be absolutely insane. So we'll see what happens. Moving on, the NCAA last year, amid the confusion with the pandemic, March Madness tournament was canceled, and this year the NCAA came out this week and actually announced that they're going to be holding the whole tournament in Indianapolis and the surrounding area. And honestly, I think that's a good idea. During the pandemic, it's definitely the right call. They're not going to be doing the same thing, I think, as the NBA, but it should be pretty similar. It will keep the spread of the virus down since they won't be traveling around the country and doing all their games at different venues. And they're still going to take a huge revenue hit because I don't think fans are likely going to be able to go to the games, but it's still going to end up being a good thing, and I think it's a really good thing that they're determined that they're going to hold the NCAA tournament. I want to say that the women's March Madness tournament is going to be in San Antonio. I think Texas is what I had seen. So keep a lookout for those. April 4th, I think, is the date for the men's final games, the 4th and the 2nd and the 4th, maybe, something like that. Now, with all that being said, I'm personally not a big fan of the NCAA, since they make so much money by using these student athletes and basically abusing these student athletes by giving them, what's considered a free education, while the NCAA and the universities are making a killing off of their games. So I am curious to see how much revenue they are going to try and generate from this tournament. Usually the March Madness tournament generates a ton of revenue every single year, but realistically it's probably not going to be something that ends up benefiting the players, at least not in my opinion. All right, so that's all there. NCAA tournament, looking forward to that. Next topic is Edinson Cavani. For anybody who doesn't know, Edinson Cavani, he is a professional soccer player in Europe. He's from Uruguay, and he plays over for Manchester United. So back in November of last year, Edinson Cavani, he scored 2 goals in a match against, I actually don't remember, it doesn't matter who it was that he was playing, Southampton maybe. So anyway, it put Manchester United ahead, and ultimately they won the game. Anyway, after scoring, usually what Cavani does is he typically gets down on one knee and acts like he's shooting a bow. So a picture of that got taken, and someone ends up sharing that on social media with a comment about how the guy loves when Cavani scores. Then Cavani ends up reposting that with a comment thanking him for the admiration. The issue everyone has is with the comment that Cavani posted. I'm not going to actually say the comment because, as we can see, many people view it as offensive, and without actually knowing what it means and knowing the culture, it looks offensive, only when viewed from the English perspective. But I'll see if I can post a link to the image in the description for reference if anybody doesn't have a clue what it is that I'm talking about. I think it's important to look into this if you don't know what I'm talking about because of what they're doing. So when translated into English, Cavani's comment roughly means "thank you, little black friend." And people have viewed that as insensitive. Personally, I disagree. And I think that people need to understand that there are cultural differences here. Cavani is from South America. He's from Uruguay. And from what I can tell and what I've been able to find, he doesn't really speak English at all. And if he does, his English is really bad. So I wouldn't have any kind of expectation that he would actually know English. And in addition to that, he grew up in Uruguay, and he played for some teams down there. And then his professional career was some teams down there, and eventually he played at Napoli in Italy. He played for PSG recently in France, and now he's playing at Manchester United in England. Now, Napoli, obviously, it's in Italy. They don't speak English. I'm sure they know English, but they don't speak English on a regular basis. PSG, that's in France. That's also not an English-speaking country. So he would have never had the reason to learn any kind of English language. So back to the comment anyway. I think that if you talk to any Spanish-speaking person from South America, they'll tell you that Cavani's comment is a term of endearment. I have a friend that's from Colombia and is a native Spanish speaker that had mentioned this particular word to me and this particular kind of comment to me about 8 months ago while we were having a conversation about how, woke culture and everything like that is kind of ruining, sometimes ruining diversity. And so he mentioned this to me, and when I saw that Cavani was getting a lot of heat on social media for it, I told him about it, and he was totally surprised because he knows the meaning. He grew up speaking Spanish. He grew up with this. He knows what this means, and he knows that Cavani was not being racist with his comment. He knows that it's a term of endearment. Anyway, Cavani ended up getting a 3-game ban and a €100,000 fine from England's Football Association for the post. He has since deleted the post. I think he deleted the post not too long after it was, he started catching heat for it, but it doesn't really change the fact that he still caught heat for it. So, additional to that, Manchester United also took some heat for this because people thought that they should have provided him with cultural training prior to coming into the country. And I'm honestly confused because what's the expectation here? Are we just going to generate a list of all the words and phrases that people can't say in every single language and then just publish that? Is that what we're going to do? Because that doesn't make any sense. By the way, there are certain things that are considered terms of endearment, such as this, in one culture, and then once it's translated to another culture, it doesn't mean the same thing. So that's something to pay attention to. It's something to understand. So, and moving on, there are some instances, and I'll give one instance of actual racism that wasn't punished. So back in 2010-2011 Champions League season, Sergio Busquets, who plays for Barcelona, shouted mono at Marcelino, who is a Brazilian guy. He is black. He plays for Real Madrid. So evidently, mono in Spanish means monkey. And nothing was done in this instance. So pay attention, see that, right? That's one instance where nothing was actually done. Something that was considered, it could be considered actual racism. Nothing's done. I totally understand where the FA is coming from in what they're doing. Obviously, I'm a native English speaker, and unless I was told what this term meant, I would question it until I looked it up and found out what it meant. With that being said, as a whole, we need to be more understanding of cultural differences. I'm not trying to preemptively make excuses for racism in sports either. European soccer has a huge issue with racism, and I totally understand what the FA is trying to do here, but I think that their efforts should be spent in other areas of actual racism and not virtue signaling to make it appear as though they're doing something. Real racism has no place in the world and no place in sports. Anyone doing it should be punished, and I think with some of the other instances that they have punished teams and fans, we're headed in the right direction. But I think in this case, they got it wrong. Anyway, that's the end of that. Move on to the next thing. Amen and a woman. For anybody who knows what I'm talking about, on January 2nd, this Representative Emmanuel Cleaver gave the opening prayer for the 117th Congress. And there's not an issue with the prayer that he gave, but he did close the prayer out in a very odd way. When listening, you can hear him say at the end, Amen, Amen, and a woman. Normal prayers that have been closed out typically end with a simple Amen. That's how prayers have been for my entire life, and that's how they've been in every prayer that I've ever heard. It seems as though woke culture has gone too far once again. Woke culture killed comedy, or is killing comedy. Many jokes are considered funny because they're a play on common gender roles or stereotypes. Dave Chappelle has spoken out against this in his comedy specials. Sticks and Stones. Sticks and Stones that ended up coming out, and I think it was in 2019, and it has a Rotten Tomatoes score by the audience, that's us, the people that are watching it, of a 99% approval, because it's funny. It's hilarious. Dave Chappelle is a funny guy, but the critic approval is 39%. And that right there tells you exactly what's going on. The critics don't want to sit out there and say that this is hilarious, because Dave Chappelle is using jokes that aren't considered, politically correct. So the woke culture has invaded its way into comedy and, looks and says that Sticks and Stones is trash, and the reality is that it's not. I understand the nature of inclusiveness, but sometimes it goes in the wrong direction. As with the incident with Cavani, woke culture attacks things that don't need to be attacked. Right? Historically, there have been terms that have been, used gender, and basically the entire Spanish language is gender specific. Right? Words will end in O if they're male and A if they're female. English isn't necessarily the same way. Some words are, but many words are not gendered. Things like actor and actress, right? Waiter, waitress, bachelor, bachelorette. I would say that most people say amen at the end of a prayer just because they're saying it, and that's the thing that they've always said, and they don't actually know the actual meaning. So amen, as many people have posted on Twitter this week and everything like that, means so be it. So it technically doesn't have anything to do with being gendered. It's not like mankind or anything like that, where it's derived from the word man. So this guy is using the term a woman, and it doesn't really make much sense. I would say that this is definitely an example of woke culture going too far. I tried to look at this from a direction that was different, and I was thinking that he was saying something maybe that a man and a woman was possibly the shape that God could take. But as I was listening, I kind of listened to the whole thing, and I heard him refer to God as he in the speech. So I figure it obviously can't be that. It doesn't really make much sense to try to look at it from that perspective. It's obvious that he's using a man and a woman to try to be more inclusive with all of this. So this seems stupid to me. And, with all that, it's nothing more than, in my opinion, misplaced wokeness. As I mentioned before, it's the same with Cavani. Effort should be put in other places to be more inclusive than at the end of a prayer that realistically has nothing to do with gender. So, the big news of the week is what happened Wednesday during the protest that occurred at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. I'm sure that everyone has heard about it to this point, and if you haven't, consider yourself lucky. It's been all over the news, social media, conversations, it's everywhere. The long-term impact of this is still to be seen, since people are currently getting arrested and social media companies are making changes in an effort to try to keep something like this from happening again. So on Wednesday, January 6th, there was a planned protest in Washington, D.C. to protest the certification of the Electoral College. The protest began, as most do, is peaceful. It was a peaceful protest, and Trump gave his speech in the morning. I think it ended up being about an hour long, and in the speech, he encouraged people to move towards the Capitol. As people started to gather outside of the Capitol, they began pushing at the Capitol Police. Eventually, the mob mentality took over, and people began pushing past the barricades. For what it's worth, 4 years ago, when the Electoral College was certifying Trump as the president, many of the representatives on the Democratic side also stood up to protest the certification due to the idea of the Russian collusion, which at the time there was no proof or anything for. It was just suspected Russian collusion. And currently there is no overwhelming evidence of any kind of voter fraud. So we're kind of in the same situation. So I'm sure there will be, I'm sure there's going to be an extensive investigation into the voter stuff as well as we go, continued, right? They did it with Russia. I'm sure it's going to continue to happen with the voter fraud. So that this concept of protesting, the Electoral College isn't necessarily new. And people have the right to protest the election. Representatives have the right to protest the election. That doesn't mean that it's going to be heard or it's going to be founded in any kind of truth. Oh, and one other thing, the same thing happened back in 2004 when Bush was reelected. So when he was elected for the second time, there were people that stood up and protested the certification of the Electoral College then. Not the breaking into the Capitol, but it was just the protest of the Electoral College. So it's not breaking into the Capitol. The Capitol, this was a first time for the Cap. This is a first for people breaking into the Capitol. There is a lot that goes into the development of this, but basically the crowd continued to push towards the Capitol, and the police were overwhelmed, and they couldn't keep the people out. They continued to push farther and farther, and eventually pushed their way into the Capitol building and into the House chamber. As well as breaking into offices throughout the Capitol building. They stole items from offices and took pictures of themselves in the building. 5 people were actually killed in this event. The good news is that the representatives later came back in and they finished their work. So they finished certifying the Electoral College the same night. I don't believe that Trump is to blame for this. Now, I'm not sitting here and I'm not saying that he's innocent. He is guilty of fanning the flames. He could have used his platform and his ability to reach a wide range of people to simply calm down the situation. He just kept saying that the election was stolen. People hear him say things like that, and they don't really hear the rest of it. So now we all know what happened. It's hard to miss on the TV and in the news. I'll give my opinion on this, and then I'll give my opinion on how we got here and where we're going from here. So, I don't disagree with the protest itself. I believe that people have the right to protest whatever they would like. Outside the White House, there have been people protesting Trump basically every single day of his entire presidency. And that's their right to do it. It's the same with people protesting outside of Planned Parenthood, but that doesn't, I don't agree with it, but that doesn't take away their right to go and protest. Keep those things in mind. People have the right to do it. With all that being said, those protests were just that, protests. Once they turn violent and people start to resort to physical harm, that's where I draw the line. I felt the same way with the protest over the summer. For frame of reference, I personally went to a protest in D.C. in the beginning of the summer and saw a large group of people break past the first barrier and move towards the White House. Things started to get a little out of control for me, and I decided to leave and drove home. I didn't want to be part of the violence that broke out later in the night. D.C. was prepared for the riots over the summer in the fact that they were boarding up businesses. And I differentiate the difference between riots and protests. The protests were peaceful, and the riots were the violence. So most of the protests over the summer were peaceful. Everything that happened during the day, get out there, have your voice heard, that's a protest. A riot is when you start breaking property. When you start destroying businesses, when you start breaking into places. People broke into Targets, people burned buildings down during the summer. That does not compare to what happened at the Capitol. What they did at the Capitol is completely different. With that being said, I also disagree with the violence that happened this past week in D.C. They should have never done what they did. The protest, anything that you want outside of the Capitol. You can go out there and you can say basically whatever you want. Breaking into the Capitol is criminal. All those people should be prosecuted for their actions. How did we get here? Personally, I'm not surprised that this happened. For the past 4 years, you've had a media that has continued to push the idea that Trump was unfairly elected and that Russia interfered with the election specifically to get Trump elected. For a long time, "Not my president" trended on Twitter. That went for years. Crybaby Trump. Right? I could go into the number of anti-Trump Twitter hashtags that are out there. but that would probably take all day. Basically what happened was he was targeted because of who he is. Lawsuits were filed over Trump blocking people. It was ultimately decided that he can't block anybody, and then additionally to that, the media asks questions that are accusatory and obviously aimed at this type of gotcha news that we have today. You have a media that is willing to publish without verifying, and that's on both sides, but they're willing to publish things without verifying. But it doesn't matter whether I'm right or I'm wrong. I'm first. If we're wrong, we'll just publish a retraction, page 17, somewhere like that, bottom of the page. We'll publish a retraction, but we won't put that headline news, and that's one of the problems. Congressional representatives have also been very accusatory. Adam Schiff, for years, claimed that there was evidence coming out that there was going to end up being there was evidence of the Russia collusion, and that panned out to not be anything. Once the Russia collusion didn't pan out the way everyone on the left thought it was going to, they shifted to the next thing. The idea was ultimately impeachment from day one. They pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to get this guy to do something wrong. The FBI had agents that were conspiring against him. Does anybody remember Peter Strzok and Lisa Page? Now, I don't think Lisa Page was an FBI agent, but Peter Strzok was an FBI agent, and they have correspondence between them conspiring against Donald Trump. There is definitely illegal acts that took place in an effort to get Trump removed from office. Government officials hide the dirt all the time. If you believe that the government operates on the up and up and no one commits crimes, and Trump is the only person to have ever done anything like that, well, I got some oceanfront property in the middle of Montana that I'm willing to sell you. So Trump is not innocent in any of this. He was the president, and the way that he was a businessman, in my opinion. He did shady things, but that's how politicians are. Kickbacks and perks for voting a certain way. That's American politics. I'm not excusing anything that he did or they do. I'm just saying that that's how it is. All you really have to do is follow the money and figure out who is getting rich, and you'll know who's corrupt. Since all that happened over the course of 4 years, and that wasn't it. There's a lot more that goes into this, but it's all roughly the same. It's relentless attacks on the man, as well as discrediting the opinions of the people that voted for him. When the media and the left band together and attack Trump and his voting base, it's not a surprise that people take offense to it. You have a group of people that are tired of the establishment in Washington doing whatever they wanted and not looking out for the everyday Americans. Trump is a symbol of a hurting democracy that has a bunch of people that feel unrepresented. Most of the stuff that is done to Trump is really deserved because Trump typically is the aggressor. He usually comes out at people first, and then they are essentially forced to have to respond. He is in no way presidential. He doesn't act like what we would think a president is. And that's honestly part of the reason why he was elected. If you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always gotten. And Americans were tired of that. Relentless attacks on the president and relentless attacks on the people that support him. I think that's how we got to the point where we're at. You have alienated an entire group of people and pushed them off and told them they're wrong. You've called them racist for years. If you dissent from the mainstream opinion, then you're a racist. You're wrong, you're bigoted, everything like that. Basically what has happened is the media has pushed this idea that every single Trump supporter is racist, bigoted, white supremacist, everything. And they get thrown into this category. Is it that much of a fucking surprise that they all band together? Not to me, it's not. So where are we going from here? So Trump got banned from Twitter. As many people know, he ended up getting his ban the day of. And then they were going to hold, I think either Twitter or Facebook was going to hold off for a couple of days, like 2 weeks or something like that. And eventually they came out and they said that they were going to permanently ban him. I thought it was supposed to be just a short while until things calmed down. but I think it's going to end up probably being for longer. I can't imagine that they're going to permanently ban, but we'll see what happens once he's no longer president. We'll see how much he is actually, how active he is on Twitter if he gets his Twitter account back. So supposedly there's a couple of posts that he has to delete so that he can get his account back, but I don't know. We'll see what happens. So once Twitter took action, there was other companies that followed. YouTube, I think, is going to be more strict with what they do. Twitch came out. They did something. Instagram, TikTok, Reddit. I think Reddit was just the Donald Reddit forum. Facebook, they did some stuff. A couple of surprising ones for me, at least. Shopify, they shut down his store. I think it was the DonaldTrump.com store, Donald Trump something. They shut down a store for him. And then the other one, Pinterest. So Trump doesn't actually have a Pinterest account, but they banned a couple of hashtags that I guess people use on the website. It has since come out that many plan on banning him permanently, so we'll see what happens there. I think the only reason that many of these companies took action is because they don't want the woke mob to turn on them. They don't want to be boycotted. One thing to keep in mind with all of this is for a long time, people have been talking about wanting to ban Trump. And it's just so convenient that 14 days before Trump's supposed to be out of office, now mainstream media, or I guess big tech, has decided they're going to end up taking action. Realistically, all they're trying to do is they're going to say, look, we did it. We banned him, right? Because on the same day, the Democratic Party took control of the Senate, which meant that the Democratic Party can enact whatever change they want to on big tech. Technically, I guess, I'm sure there's probably a lot more that goes into it, but they can do a lot more to enact change and regulate big tech. And big tech doesn't want that to happen. So big tech is going to come out as they have, and they said, "Oh no, guys, don't come at us. We did what you wanted to. We went ahead and banned them all." So, I think you're going to end up we're going to see some regulation come down the road. But long term, the thing that we should look at is the place that all these people are going to go when they no longer have access to Twitter. If you look, there is conservative media popping up, and it's all becoming more and more popular. Personally, from what I was able to find, OAN, that's One America News, has been around since 2013, and I had no idea what One American News was. Blaze Media, I have seen that. I've seen ads for it on YouTube and everything. I think I've seen them on Facebook as well. But Blaze Media has been getting backing. They have a bunch of shows on there that people pay attention to. They have decent decent engagement. There's also, they're talking about the things CNN, other people aren't talking about. Places like CNN. Parler's another one. That's another avenue that people have to communicate. Right now, it's currently, I think it's going to end up being banned. It got removed from the Google Play Store, so people with Androids can't download it. It got banned from Apple Play. Amazon Web Services is also, they're going to stop hosting the website, but they'll find another place to go. I have no doubt. Also, one thing to note, I want to say Wednesday, Parler had 255,000 new downloads. From what I've seen, not too long ago, like a year ago, they had 1 million users, and they've steadily grown, and they continue to grow and grow and grow. Honestly, I'd say it's kind of weird that you can't even get access to those anymore. So unless you've downloaded Parler, you can't download those. So anyone who's trying to monitor what's going on Parler, you can't download it on your phone or anything like that. I guess you'll have to, if they have a website, you'll have to go to the website, as long as they'll be able to find somebody who's willing to host them, which I'm sure that they will. I guarantee they will, because they're going to come and they're going to say, "Hey, here's a pile of money. Put us on your servers." Whatever the hell it is that they do, that's what's going to end up happening. Why are these places gaining traction? Well, when the mainstream media chooses to cover certain things and not cover other things, it makes people distrustful. Some of these news sites are supposed to be the trusted names in news. CNN, they're supposed to be the trusted name in news. You can trust what they are saying, but when your, quote unquote, objective news anchors are going and giving their actual commentary, through their Twitter accounts, it makes people kind of not trust the things that they're saying. When you take away a group of people's ability to communicate in the open, they're going to end up finding a way that they can communicate in the dark. So that's something to think about and to look forward to, because that's going to end up happening. People will find a way. My last point on this section right here, I guess, this topic is, where's the punishment for the media? We can all agree that the people that broke into the Capitol should be arrested and prosecuted. Obviously, we're looking at Trump getting a ban from Twitter. That's the one social media website that he uses all the time. But aside from that, as I mentioned earlier, the media pushed their version of events for years. And when it turned out that that wasn't true, they just moved on. Mainstream media should be held accountable for the role that they have played in creating a group of people that feel so disconnected from the rest of the U.S. that they feel as that the only way to solve that problem is to break into the Capitol. I also throw some blame on, towards the meme and trolling community. People are looking to do something funny. Do it for the gram. I'm sure everybody's heard that before. It makes people do stupid stuff, and that they really wouldn't do otherwise. And we can't throw blame at Trump as just being this one-man show. The media helped create this problem. So anyway, moving on from that, what happens without Trump? Because he'll be out of office here soon. The Democrats used to have Trump to point towards as being the enemy. He was the bad guy. And for the longest time, you could just point at him as being the bad guy. We unify around a common enemy. Now that they don't have that common enemy, what's going to happen? What direction is the Democratic Party going to have? Are they going to unify? And are they going to end up moving forward and actually making real, legitimate change? I think that what will happen is we will see the Democratic Party start to fracture as more of the fringe, far left people that don't agree with the center left people, as they start to fight and they start to bicker. And I think a couple of years from now, in the next election, I think we'll start to see a few more people get pushed away from the left side, more towards the middle. Trump, I think, pushed a lot of people from center to the left, and I think what's going to end up happening is the far left is going to end up, once Trump is gone, the far left is going to end up pushing those people back. So we'll see what happens. I think that's what's going to end up happening in politics in the next few years, but I don't know. We'll see. And one last thing that I wanted to mention about this, it's a bit of an analogy, is, politics is like sports. And I'm going to reference Deflategate here. All right, anybody that doesn't know what Deflategate is, a few years ago, Tom Brady, he's playing for the Patriots. They beat the absolute piss out of the Colts in the 2014 AFC Championship game. And it turns out that the balls were deflated a little bit, and they were not sitting at the right PSI. The fallout of the game is the fact that, many people, agreed that Tom Brady and the Patriots cheated. The Patriot fans were loyal, and they didn't think it was a big deal. Tom Brady's a winner. People hate him just to hate him. He's a good quarterback. They make fun of him for wearing Uggs. They make fun of him for crying. Basically anything they can. They hate on Tom Brady. But Patriots fans love him. They can't get enough of him. I'm not saying that these are similar, that there's any similarities between Trump and Tom Brady. But the way that people treat the two of them is very similar. Sports cheating is the same way. The Astros, and when it came out that they were cheating in the 2017 World Series, a lot of people hated on them for it. but not Astros fans. Astros fans just told everybody that you're basically, you're just a sore loser. That's all you are. You're just a sore loser. Here recently, there's a report that came out talking about other athletes being on steroids or having performance-enhancing drugs. And we'll see what happens with that. When it's my guy, he didn't do anything wrong. When it's your guy, he needs to burn in hell. And that's the idea that we use with politics. Politicians are essentially, they're not professional athletes. They obviously don't perform on the same level as professional athletes, but the way that we treat politicians is roughly the same. In closing, it's going to be a rocky road forward. Unless we want something like this to happen again, there is going to have to be some compromise on both sides. We're supposed to be considered the best country in the world. People leave their homes to come here to get away from all the craziness. Both Republicans and Democrats are responsible for the government that they have created. Dems refused to work with Trump, and Republicans gave him a pass. We need to hold them accountable in the next election. But realistically, we won't. We are all so blind to what is really happening, and we think that these politicians care about us. As I mentioned before, when your star quarterback is accused of using steroids, you don't believe the accusations. When it's the other guy, you think he should burn. But the thing is, no one is paying attention to the 100 other guys that are also using steroids. We are constantly looking in the wrong direction with all of this. Sports is just an analogy. It's for trying to understand how stupid our political system is. It's essentially a real-life rivalry between the Red Sox and the Yankees. It's all dumb. We'll see what happens moving on from there. That's all I got for today. I'll be back next week with another episode, and I'm going to keep doing these regardless of who's listening. It's my way of putting my opinion down and getting it out there. So be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.